Rishi Sunak says it's the next industrial revolution. Elon Musk says it could lead to our extinction. Fresh from the UK's Global Summit on Artificial Intelligence, we have one of the world's foremost experts on our panel. Tonight, we are in Chipping Campden, in the Cotswolds, a delightful market town which has been a safe Tory seat for as long as anyone can remember. But our audience, as always, reflects the overall electoral picture across the country. And tonight they also want to talk about the war in Gaza and those sweary WhatsApps we're hearing at the COVID inquiry. Is that really what it's like in government? Welcome to Question Time. From the government, Jeremy Quin is a minister in the Cabinet Office. He's responsible for government reform and helping deliver the PM's agenda. For Labour, we have Nick Thomas-Symonds, a shadow minister, who's heavily involved in organising his party for the next election. He's also written books about three big Labour figures of the past: Harold Wilson, Claire Matley and Nye Bevan. Camilla Cavendish is contributing editor and columnist at the Financial Times and a crossbench peer. She was previously head of David Cameron's policy unit at Number 10 and also advised the Department of Health during the pandemic. Marie van der Zyl is president of the Board of Deputies of British Jews. It calls itself the voice of the British Jewish community in this country. She was awarded an OBE this year for services to faith and integration. And the artificial intelligence entrepreneur Mustafa Suleyman co-founded and then sold DeepMind, the AI wing of Google. He'd previously worked for former London Mayor Ken Livingstone. Now he's based in California, leading another of his own tech startups, Inflection AI, and he's just written a book, The Coming Wave: Technology, Power and the 21st Century's Greatest Dilemma. Good evening. Welcome to our panel. Welcome to our audience here in Chipping Campden. Great to see you. And, of course, welcome to you at home. There's always a lively conversation on social media. Feel free to join in. And you can listen to the programme on BBC Sounds after we've gone out on air. So, should we take our first question, which is from Alison Charlton.
While artificial intelligence has huge benefits and potential, for example, in the medical field, what are the risks to our safety and security?
Right. If we're talking about artificial intelligence, Mustafa, I'm going to come to you first, because I suspect you know more about it than anyone else on this panel, and you've just come from the government's Global Summit on AI. So what are the risks to our safety and security?
Well, we've just come from Bletchley today for the government's AI Summit, and it's been pretty historic, actually. It's the first time all of the AI companies developing the largest AI models in the world have got together at the same time with the Secretary General of the UN, the President of the European Commission, the Prime Minister, and we've actually agreed a set of AI safety principles, which include things like testing pre-deployment and sharing our models with the government to make sure that they adhere to the best safety practices. I think at the moment, these models don't actually pose any material risk. I think in the future, there's every possibility that they're going to get better and better, and they're going to affect the labour market. I mean, these are labour-replacing technologies which will make us smarter, will make us more productive. They'll give everybody a really smart tutor in your pocket. They'll help us with AI diagnostics. But they're also going to fundamentally replace labour. And I think the big question for us as a society is to try to figure out how we manage the greatest transition in the history of our species. This is a really new and powerful technology. And I think many of the companies, myself included, are trying to learn the lessons of social media. This is a time when we're looking back over the last 10 years and reflecting on what could have been done better. And this time taking a precautionary principle, proactively saying, there are many, many benefits, and we should be super optimistic about those, but there are also real risks, and let's talk about them.
OK. So, Jeremy, the summit has taken place. Mustafa's talking about it in very positive terms. As far as the government's concerned, what are the risks to our safety and security?
Well, I think Mustafa's very right to talk about this in very positive terms. I think it's been a great success. It's great to have all those people, 28 countries in the EU, and have all the companies in the same place. I think it's a great initiative of Rishi to look to the longer term. And as Mustafa says, most of those risks are longer term, but it's getting the infrastructure in first. It's making
there are risks right now in terms of deep fakes, in terms of people putting out election misleading election propaganda. We've seen that in at least a couple of elections already.
There is, and we've got a democracy task force aimed at exactly that and working with the companies to ensure. I know you had a very bad experience.
Because I was deep-faked. I was deep-faked in a financial scam, in case you're wondering what that's referring to.
And we are getting after that, using the auspices of the companies to do it. But looking to the long term, there are all kinds of risks that could develop. If we're working with the companies, if we're seeing the models, if we're working through the implications, if we're ahead of the game, and this doesn't mean, I'm afraid I think Nick's party's got this wrong, it doesn't mean legislating now. It means making certain we understand the risks, we understand the principles, and this is going to change dramatically over the years to come, and it's making certain we have the flexibility, working with all those who are, like Mustafa, experienced in the world of AI, to make certain that we as a government have the right regulatory framework.
Well, it's not,
an important step.
It's not just Labour. I mean, obviously, President Biden has just brought in new regulation as well. So, you know, it's not that Labour's completely out of step with other countries.
It depends what the regulation's going to say, though.
So, the risk to our safety and security?
Well, look, clearly the risks are that AI falls into the wrong hands. It falls into the arms of terrorist groups or hostile states that wish us harm. I think that... And there's also been a number of people who've put forward some of the risks, including Mustafa, I know that you have and many others have as well. But we've also got to look at this extraordinary transformation and indeed its potential as well. Now, first off, I am very proud, by the way, of what the code breakers did at Bletchley Park in World War II. I'm very proud of what Alan Turing did in that and indeed what Alan Turing did after the war in terms of being the father of modern-day computer science. So I don't underestimate for a minute the significance of A, it being at Bletchley Park, and B, the international work, which I think is hugely important. But where I do disagree with Jeremy is in this reluctance of the Prime Minister to look at legislation. And I watched the Prime Minister give a press conference at the end of the summit today, and he said that he didn't think companies should mark their own homework. Then in the same breath is saying, well, actually, I don't want to rush to legislate. President Biden has issued an executive order already. And what we actually do need to see now is that discussion around legislation starting, whether it is in terms of safety going forward. What regime do we want? Do we want independent oversight? Well, of course we do. And we should be looking as well at all the impacts, whether it's on jobs, on security, its transformative potential, whether it's in medical diagnostics or in traffic management. To do that, just one more point, we should actually have in government a regulatory innovation office that will be looking at all this and its potential and how best we harness it. And the Prime Minister, by not legislating, is, I'm afraid, missing a trick.
OK. There's a few hands going up. I'm going to go round the panel and then I'm going to come to you. And given that Mustafa probably knows, well, definitely, with the greatest respect to our panel, knows more about it than anyone in this room, I might get Mustafa to answer most of the questions. But anyway, Camilla, do you think the politicians are ready?
No, they're not, and none of us are. And I don't know about anyone else in this room, but I feel like you, Mustafa, and I greatly admire what you've done. Thank you. There is a gulf of understanding between you and, I speak for most of us, perhaps, in this room. And that is a real problem. And I have downloaded your book, but as I said to you earlier, I haven't finished reading it. This stuff is really hard, and people like you are already acknowledging that these autonomous systems, we don't even fully understand how they work. So when we talk about regulation, and I just think we should take the politics out for a minute, if you don't mind, guys, because that's not what it's about. I mean, when it comes to regulation, in this country, we can't even stop water companies poisoning our rivers. So I don't think that model is going to work very well for regulating this kind of technology. And I do feel you've talked about needing a new Turing test. Now, Alan Turing, as Nick mentioned, set this Turing test where he said, we'll know when artificial intelligence has come. It'll be when the machine is able to have as good a conversation with you as a human being. Now, I now discover we passed that test.
Right.
Who said that? Who rang up the government and said, gosh, guys, we've passed the test. Shouldn't we do something? We are relying...
Well, we did.
Well, OK, well, good for you. But you know what, at the moment, the world is relying on companies like yours and good people like you to make the arguments. But companies like yours are driven by profit.
Right.
So what is the new model that we need urgently which can really regulate? Because I think it's just genuinely difficult for politicians. I don't know the answer to whether we need legislation or not. At a basic level, millions of guys and women who drive trucks across the world are going to be displaced by autonomous vehicles. Why don't we just say no? We don't need to have autonomous vehicles. 3.5 million people in the United States make their living driving a truck. It seems to me it would be really easy to just say, we don't want that. We could eat, but at the same time, of course we can have brilliant things on medical diagnostics. But I suppose I'm just asking you the question. How
and I will let you answer
around?
that question. I'm going to get to Marie, and then I've made a note of it, and I also want our audience to hear. Marie.
I'm going to read your book, Mustafa. But
This is like the best plug ever for you, Mustafa, if only I'd realised. Oh, my goodness. I'm sure other books on AI are available.
They certainly do exist.
Yeah.
But it seems that the wonderful innovations that we're hearing about are outpacing any sort of regulation, not just in the UK, but also what about around the world? It was only, I think, last week that Liz Truss was saying that China shouldn't be allowed an invitation to come and attend. People were giving their views on this, and I think Jeremy Hunt said, well, they're not going to go away, and there was this whole debate as to how they're going to come into this. And how are we going to have, perhaps without them as a superpower? And I think the US government looked at the top 5 facial recognition companies, and these are all Chinese. How are we going to work in a joined up way? Because otherwise we're not going to have security, we're not going to have guarantees.
All right, let's hear a bit from our audience. Yes, the man there in the green sweater.
Hi. Yeah, we've heard all about the negatives and the legislation we might need. Are there any positives that we can take from AI? It seems like it could be quite an exciting future ahead.
OK, I'll take a few questions, and then, Mustafa, it was over to you. Yes, the man at the back with the glasses.
So Mustafa at the start said that it would make us smarter. I'd like to hear his justification for that, because I think it might have the opposite effect, sort of like students having their essays written for them, people having their job applications written for them, people being replaced in the workplace. So I'd like to hear about how it would make us smarter.
OK, let me hear from the woman in the glasses and the stripy top there.
Is there a danger that we'll just become autonomous and just lose our creativity, lose our personality, lose our originality, lose our creativity? You know, what will happen in terms of AI to ordinary people like me?
Right, so there's a lot of questions there, and you'll have to be reasonable.
There are some great points.
But so let's answer, first of all, how do we regulate?
Right.
Should we regulate? How can we ensure that companies do not become bad actors?
So the first step is that we have to establish the scientific consensus, independent and impartial from companies like my own, so that there is widespread expert-driven agreement on what is actually happening. Because at the moment, there's a lot of fear, there's a lot of uncertainty, and I think that's largely because people don't understand the core models. Over the last 6 months, I think that has actually improved a lot, because there's a scientific consensus growing around an IPCC-style panel, an international panel on AI safety, and that's what we've been calling for a while. I think that will help a great deal. The second thing to say is, yes, it's true that we're for-profit companies, but actually, my own company, for example, is a public benefit corporation, and that's a hybrid model that brings purpose and the legal obligation to do the right thing alongside our for-profit mission. It doesn't solve all the problems of being a company and the history of social media and capitalism in general, but it's a first step in the right direction, and I think that should be encouraged. Many other companies should be led to embrace that external responsibility and take internal responsibility for how we act.
And how will it make us smarter?
Well, I think it's going to make us smarter. People often said, well, the calculator is going to make us, dumber. But actually, these tools give us access to information that make us much more creative. In a very personalized way, they give us access to the entire world's information. And people are already using these tools every day, millions and millions of people, to learn exactly what they're interested in their own style, in their own language.
Does it make us smarter if someone's writing our essays for us?
Well, on the whole, I think it definitely does, because it gives us all massively more access to information, right? So this isn't just about plagiarism. This is about joint creativity between an AI and a human, creating something that has never existed before. And that, I think, is going to drive invention forward, unlike we've ever seen. And we're seeing that in the scientific progress, for example. There are many applications of these methods to AI diagnostics for healthcare, for drug discovery.
Yes, well, let's hear some of the positives, actually, because that was one of the questions.
Or take climate change, for example. I mean, there are many use cases now where we're finding more efficient ways to design batteries so that we can take advantage of solar. We're finding more efficient ways of running huge data centers, more efficient ways of running wind turbines to make sure that we get more out of renewable energy. And so we should be really optimistic. This is a time when we need productivity improvements like never before. And this is an engine for creativity that is going to be widely available to everybody. Just as the smartphone has got massively cheaper and is now available to billions of people, the very top don't get a special smartphone. No matter how rich you are, everybody gets the same access to the best laptop and the same smartphone, at least the top couple billion people. And that is also going to be true for access to intelligence. I think that's going to make everybody much more capable.
And what about the woman you were asking about, what about our creativity? Are we going to lose our creativity? Are we going to kind of effectively turn into kind of automatons?
No, I think it's going to. I think having a conversational AI to inspire you and to provoke you and to teach you and to help you explore new paths that you'd never thought about before. Those are the kind of use cases that people are actually using these conversational AI bots for today.
Camilla made the point about truck drivers in America, for example. I mean, Elon Musk has been talking to the Prime Minister tonight, and he has just said there will come a point where no job is needed. Now, depending on your point of view, you might think, well, if the government's going to fund me, hurrah, or you might think that sounds like a nightmare scenario. Do you agree with Elon Musk?
This is why we need an impartial, independent assessment of the trajectory of this technology. Because
well, he's in a reasonable position, isn't he, to
well, he's not
make
an
a
AI
judgment?
scientist, and he doesn't have a, has a small AI company, but not a, he has many other companies. So his expertise is more in space and cars. I mean, I think that certainly over a 50-year period, we should be concerned. It's right to be concerned. Every new technology has destabilised the landscape whilst it's also delivered incredible benefits. So it won't be bumpy and smooth. But I think the point about raising it now is that democratic governments should make decisions that are in the best interests of everybody. This is a moment where we need the state more than ever before. We need good governance, and we need to be proactive about those regulations.
OK. I'm going to move on. Artificial intelligence, no doubt, is going to come up many times, and I'm aware, Mustafa, this is kind of all on you at the moment. So let's spread the love a little bit around the panel. Before we do, I just want to tell you where we are next week, which is in North Wales in Llandudno. And in a fortnight, we are in Bridgewater in Somerset. I believe Jacob Rees-Mogg is coming on that programme. If you'd like to be in our audience, just go to the website to apply. So that's Llandudno next week and Bridgewater in Somerset the week after. OK. Steve Acton, where are you? Right, let's hear your question.
Given the rising number of civilian deaths in Gaza, is it time for the government and opposition to call for a full ceasefire? If not, what is the justification to continue as things are?
And this is obviously what a lot of people are talking about, Steve. Jeremy. So the government is not calling for a full ceasefire?
The straight answer, Steve, is no.
And what's the justification for things to continue as they are? That's Steve's question, then.
The straightforward justification. We all grieve for civilian casualties in Gaza, of course we do. But no one in this room would have forgotten the 1,400 people who were murdered in cold blood in Israel as a result of a terrorist attack. Israel has the right to defend itself. It has the right to go after the terrorists who caused that dreadful bloodshed and degrade Hamas. It has to have that right. It's got that right in international law. It's got that right under the UN Charter. Now, it needs to act proportionately, appropriately. It needs to act under international law.
And the UN is questioning now whether it's not concluding, but it's questioning whether Israel is acting in accordance with international law.
Israel had an obvious attack, which we're all aware of, on her territory, and she has responded, which is absolutely horrific, and she has responded in going after Hamas and going after the terrorists. I think it is absolutely appalling that Hamas has shielded themselves behind civilians in Gaza. That's their MO. That's how they operate. And it makes it extremely difficult. Israel must be conscious of its international legal obligations, but it does have the right to defend itself. It does have the right to go in and sort out Hamas. And if we call for a ceasefire now, if a ceasefire occurs now, you are sending exactly the wrong signal, which is that people can get away literally with murder, and that would be wrong.
Marie, I want to come to you because you have just come back from Qatar. Yeah. And as we know, Qatar, there are Hamas leaders in Qatar, and Qatar has acted as something of an interlocutor with Hamas. So what can you tell us about that?
Well, can I just say first how much I regret the loss of any innocent civilian life. I'm sure we've all seen the horrifying pictures, and I've also met victims Kfar Aza. It's very, very, very traumatic. People were murdered in absolute cold blood, and I think the whole country is in a terrible sense of trauma. And I agree that Israel has got the right to defend itself. And the problem with Hamas is it's not just Hamas, the terrorists, the genocidal terrorists that want to destroy Israel. They are also funded and trained by Iran. It's part of a much bigger conflict. But there has to be someone somewhere who can try and mediate. We all agree, I think, that there needs to be pauses, humanitarian pauses, so that medicine and aid can come into Gaza. But there has to be an end plan. So I did go to Qatar with Ronald Lauder, who's the president of the World Jewish Congress, with a couple of others. I can't say who we met, but we spent 2 very, very full days speaking. And I think that Qatar is critical to trying to be a mediator with Hamas. And I really hope that the tensions can be de-escalated and that the hostages can be released. And the international community then has to have responsibility for making sure that there is a 2-state solution and that the international community is committed to that there is an economic recovery plan for Gaza, and that Israel has safe and secure borders so that this can never happen again. Stories of beheadings, I've read tonight, babies cooked in ovens. It can't get any worse than that. It's a trauma that will never leave the country, but we have to find a way forward and to de-escalate the tensions. And it's not just for Israel's benefit, it's the whole region and the world. Iran is a threat and a menace to all of us.
Woman there in red.
I reject your narrative that Hamas is killing innocent Palestinian civilians, including, till this date, 2,000 babies and children. Innocent. It is not Hamas that's killing them. It is one person, Benjamin Netanyahu, and his apartheid state of Israel. Can I also... I want to ask the entire panel a question.
Hang on, just 1 minute. When you say Hamas are not killing anybody...
I am talking
because clearly in Israel they most definitely did.
The question,
and that also included babies.
I agree, and I condemn the atrocities of the terrorist Hamas. But the question was referring to innocent Palestinian civilians that are forgotten. They're forgotten on most media stations. They are not the top story. Till now, 9,000 innocent Palestinian civilians have been killed.
OK, I would just say...
Who is their voice?
I'm not disputing what I'm just saying... The BBC absolutely has reported it as a top story for many, many nights. I'm not sure what outlets you're referring to, but I could certainly... for BBC News, we most certainly have. Marie, I'll let you come back in, but I'll just hear a bit more of the audio, but thank you for your point. The man behind with the poppy on.
Do we supply arms to Israel?
Jeremy?
There are... the UK government won't. There will be companies inside the UK...
There are British companies that do, I think.
That will, under licence, and we have very strict arms export regimes to make certain that they are that they have to go through a process. But there are UK companies that will sell arms to Israel within that regime, yes.
OK. The man just in front of you, yes.
I'd like to know how many Palestinians need to be killed before it's justified, to justify the number of people that are being killed in the kibbutz. And the other point I would like to make, there is a constant talk about we're going to clear the Hamas out of the country and clear them all together. Isn't this a little bit like the final solution?
Well, that's quite a thing to say. Marie, I tell you, I will come back to you, but...
I'm happy to. Don't worry, I'm happy. It's up to you.
OK, up to you then. Go on.
Absolutely not. Hamas are terrorists. Hamas are like ISIS. And I'm sure in this country, and Israel is a country the size of Wales, if 1,400 people were brutally murdered and beheaded, I'm sure that you would want to know that action's going to be taken. At the time, Israel was not at war with Hamas, and Israel isn't at war with the people of Gaza or the Palestinians. It is Hamas. And I went down to meet victims last week, that had families that had been murdered and taken as hostage in Kibbutz Gaza. These people were their friends. They were peace activists. They loved a lot of these people. One of them spent a lot of time taking Palestinian children to hospitals. They were totally shocked. They were absolutely brutally murdered. Israel is not an apartheid state. All its citizens, whether they're Arab citizens or Israeli citizens, all have equal rights under Israeli law. And if anybody in the Middle East wanted for example, to be gay, that would be the country to be in. You might laugh, but Israel is the only democracy in the Middle East.
Democracy.
OK, hang on. Let me get the rest of the panel in. So, Nick, is it time for the government opposition to call for a full ceasefire? If not, why not? Now, obviously, there are people within your party, many people within your party, who feel that it is time to call for a ceasefire. But that is not Keir Starmer's position.
Well, firstly, look, the scenes we are seeing every day are absolutely harrowing. And we all want to see, as soon as possible, an end to the fighting. We need to see the peace process really restarted properly so that we have a safe and secure Israel next to a viable Palestinian state. But no, I don't believe that now is the moment to call for a ceasefire, because to do that would be to leave Hamas with the capability to carry out another terrorist atrocity as they did on the 7th of October. And indeed, Hamas have been saying that only in recent days. And it would be to leave those hostages that Hamas took where they currently are. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't be calling for humanitarian pauses. We shouldn't be doing more to deal with this catastrophic humanitarian situation that we find in Gaza. We've seen now some opening of the Rafah crossing. I actually think we need the Disasters Emergency Committee to be utilised, working with the government for a huge raising of money, which the government could then match. That's what's happened before in the case of Ukraine. It's happened in the case of Afghanistan.
Why are you not managing to convince your own shadow ministers about this, then?
I think people...
you've got councillors who've resigned. More than 60 Labour MPs have called for a ceasefire.
Listen, I've spoken in recent weeks, not just to parliamentary colleagues, but party members, party supporters. I know someone who visited a kibbutz only weeks before it was targeted by Hamas on the 7th of October. Many of the people that she spoke to ended up being killed. I know people with relatives in Gaza who are extraordinarily worried. So I totally understand why people who have this deeply personal link feel the way they do. But that's why Keir Starmer has been listening to all the different views that are put, but he's also been very firm in the judgments that he's making as well. I think that's so important.
Mustafa.
October the 7th was horrific and barbaric and unbelievably painful to watch. And the last 3 weeks or so, I'm now seeing babies being pulled out of the rubble and children who have lost their parents. And it's exhausting. I mean, this has to be enough. It's definitely time for a ceasefire, whether we call it a humanitarian pause or an aid pause. My humanity won't let me watch this any longer. It's sickening.
Do you think Hamas would agree to a ceasefire? I mean, Hamas, I think it might have been the political leader of Hamas, who was on doing an interview only in the last couple of days and said, we must remove Israel, the Al-Aqsa flood, meaning the 7th of October. That's just the first time. There'll be a second time, a third time, a fourth time. It doesn't sound like they're in the mood for a ceasefire.
I agree with Marie's comments. I mean, it's time for de-escalation. How do you do de-escalation? Someone has to start. Someone has to take the first step. Otherwise, we're just going to be led by rage and anger, and who knows how that might affect the rest of the Middle East. Now's the time to stop.
OK. The woman here in the front.
Are the UK government, or what are the UK government doing to release the hostages?
All right, I'll come back to that, Jeremy. And, yes, the man in the striped sweater there.
Yeah, I was going to say, you said Israel has a right to self-defence. That does not mean killing children every single day. And I also want to say, Israel is the biggest recruiter of Hamas. What you're doing today, you're creating more and more people who are going to be wanting to do more damage in the future.
Camilla.
So that is one of the risks, isn't it? That's what happened in Afghanistan with the Taliban, and the terrible risk, as you say, for Israel is that the more civilian casualties are caused in Palestine, the more recruits there will be to Hamas. And I agree that makes this even more difficult. Personally, though, I still find it really difficult to argue for a ceasefire. And I'll explain why I think that. I think the only way to actually get peace in this situation is to have a change of regimes in two places. To see a properly moderate democratic government in Palestine that actually represents the Palestinian people in Gaza, and see an end to Benjamin Netanyahu. I think we are about to see the end to Benjamin Netanyahu because he has not delivered the one thing he promised the Israeli people, which was security. He has done a number of other things which many, many Jews I know totally disagree with, and many Israelis totally disagree with, and it's time for him to go. But at the moment, if you call for a ceasefire, you are leaving the hostages on the other side of the wall, and you are unable to negotiate because the people on the other side are terrorists who have never wanted peace in the 16 years that they have been oppressing the people of Gaza. So that is my problem. And I mean, Mustafa, I agree, you know, it's kind of a question, what is the difference between a humanitarian pause and a ceasefire? Well, I think Israel has to try and minimise the casualties as far as humanly possible, and it's not at all clear whether it's doing that. It has to let more aid in. But I equally don't see how we, from a very, very long way away, can tell it as a sovereign democracy not to try and get its people back and just to leave everything frozen.
Steve, where are you? I want to come back to you. What do you think about... You asked this question. What do you think about what you've heard?
Yeah, I think obviously the essence of the question sort of got lost with, I think, this very emotive subject. But I think really the essence of the question is there are a lot of innocent people dying. There's obviously grandmothers been taken hostage on one side. There's children dying on the other side. And it's more what can we do to stop this from happening? I feel it's not about necessarily having to take a side. It's about, as humanity, it's pretty disgusting what's going on, the whole, you know, the whole of it, and what can we actually do to do something about that? So, yeah, it's very emotive, but I think, you know, it's a struggle where you somehow got to take the emotion out of it and think, how can we solve this situation so no more civilian people die? Because it's just tragic watching every day. It's really, really upsetting.
It certainly is. Marie, there are a number of questions directed to you, so I just want you to have the final word.
These hostages have to be released. There are 30 children also that have been taken hostage. One is a baby of a few months old. That is absolutely key, I think, to de-escalation. And I'm afraid it's not as simple to say, why is the fighting carrying on? Hamas is a genocidal regime that wants to wipe Israel off the map, wants it to be annihilated. And if Israel doesn't deal with Hamas now, they will simply rearm and it will be worse for the future.
You must worry that something like Hamas will be spawned from what's happened in Gaza in the future.
No, absolutely. That's why I think that if the hostages are released, there can be some de-escalation. The international community has to get the two-state solution back on the table. They have to be behind it. They have to have a plan to give economic aid to Gaza for recovery and to enable Israel to have safe and secure borders. It can't just be left to chance. And I think the world should call on Hamas to release those hostages now. It's not a situation that can continue while those hostages are still taken. And Hamas also puts its own people in the line of fire. They put their military operations in schools, in hospitals. They don't protect their own people. And if Hamas, ISIS were in the UK, I think you would feel exactly the same, that you would want it to be gone, because it's not a recipe for world peace. It's not just Israel. It will affect the whole region.
All right. Thank you, Marie. Let's move on. Let's take another question from James Lindner. There you are.
Thank you. After the scathing comments from the COVID inquiry about dysfunctional government, how can we have confidence in the sound running of our country?
Well, scathing comments, quite sweary comments. Yeah. I think it's fair to say. There was a new phrase I'd never heard before. That was quite exciting. So, Camilla, first of all, what do you make of what you've heard? But also, of course, you were advisor to Cameron.
Yeah.
Was it like that then?
No. No.
So was everyone terribly nice to each other then?
I think the terrible thing about this is, in a way, nothing's surprised us this week, hasn't it? We all kind of knew it was a bit like the thick of it. These people were a very arrogant bunch of people who swore a lot. We kind of knew that. It's still possible to be quite shocked, though, actually. And I went to some of the hearings this week and sat in, and I still found myself shocked by the extent to which there was just a vacuum where the Prime Minister should have been. And a lot of the blame that was going on and people were running around like headless chickens was because there really wasn't a functioning Prime Minister. And the fact that he didn't get any brief during the February half-term was not the fault of the civil service. It was because, presumably, he didn't ask for a brief. And that is just absolutely appalling. So certainly when I worked in Downing Street, it was not like that. I've talked to many people who did the same job as me for different Prime Ministers, and it's never been like that.
And you were also advising the Department of Health.
I was.
Obviously, Matt Hancock was the Health Secretary. He's come in for a bit of stick, I think it's fair to say. Many people saying that he played fast and loose with the truth.
Yep. I don't know.
How did you see that?
I don't know about that, and I think we need to wait for him. I mean, there's an awful lot of people passing an awful lot of bucks in this inquiry. They've all spent a long time writing up what they're going to say, and there's a lot of... So we will see. I had a very junior role in the Department of Health, and, you know... But what I can say, I think that one of my deepest fears is this will deepen public cynicism even more about politics. You know,
a lot of nodding going on.
Well, it really has,
there.
right, for all of us. And the mistrust of politicians now affects every single political party. It doesn't matter where you are, what your tribal colours are. It really affects everybody. And there are lots of good people in politics still. There were a lot of heroes in the pandemic. And funny enough, if you read Dominic Cummings' witness statement, which I did yesterday, which is 100 pages long, he's really nice about a lot of people. Amazing, isn't it? He's really full of
surprising.
praise for a large number of people, largely civil servants, many of them women, some of whom I know, who were really good. So I'd be interested in the inquiry talking to them about what made their lives so difficult.
So can I just ask then? So coming back to James's question, how can we have confidence in the sound running of our country? No, you were saying you're thinking to make people very cynical. Do you think what we're seeing exposed in the COVID inquiry at the moment is a one-off? Or is this something that you say did not happen under Cameron, but does happen periodically?
So I guess part of what if I'm really honest, part of what worries me about the inquiry is it's terribly focused on the psychodrama.
Well, it is at the moment. It's got a hell of a long way to run.
Yeah, but it has been quite often, and I think we need it to get to the really core issues. We need it to ask some really deep questions about why there wasn't mass testing much earlier, why the procurement process is
OK, but I'm
so
asking
terrible,
you, if what we saw was a one-off, or do you think, is this something that does happen
when you're saying a one-off, what I'm saying is, I think the sort of expletives, you know, people acting out their own fantasies of what it's like to be in government, having a chief of staff who was all-powerful because the Prime Minister wasn't there, is pretty unique.
OK.
But what I'm also saying, though, is some of the much deeper problems that did, I'm quite sure, lead to more people dying than they should, remain, and we have to deal with those too.
So, Jeremy, obviously you were in government at the time.
I was.
Were you writing sweary WhatsApps?
Nope. I certainly wasn't.
And were you surprised by what you heard? Did you think, actually, because you were in the MOD at the time, but were you thinking, yeah, it's kind of what I thought it was like? Honestly.
No, honestly, I've been surprised, very surprised, and certainly not impressed by the language. There is a caveat, which is that the inquiry's got, so far, 55,000 documents from government. It's heard some of its witnesses. There's a lot more witnesses to go. So there'll be a lot more that comes out. Camilla says that it was nothing like that in David Cameron's day.
I'm not saying
nothing
there was
like that.
no swearing.
Well, it's nothing like that.
Just saying it wasn't
in my experience of government, I've not seen it at all, and I certainly haven't seen it in the Cabinet Office. So it came as a genuine
But you must have heard something, Jeremy. Come on. I mean, we all know what Westminster is. It's a fantastically gossipy place. So you say you had literally no idea that people were... They were like rats in a sack, the way it's being described over the last couple of days. I'm sure there's other sides to it as well, but from what we've seen so far, the infighting and the slagging each other off was horrendous.
As you will recall, as we'll all recall, there was a lot of work being done throughout that COVID period. So in the MOD, the armed forces were doing a fantastic job delivering the vaccine.
I'm not disputing it. I'm asking, you must have some inkling of what was going on at number 10.
I didn't. So I'm aware that there was a hugely pressurised environment. People don't always react at their best in that scenario. But what I saw was a huge amount of work. Things like the COVID vaccine were actually delivered through it all. But what I would absolutely echo, Camilla, is that look, this is inevitably this makes for good news headlines, and people will be, well, if you can print it, and people are fascinated by the personal interactions.
Well, some people are really angered by it.
But they are, and that's the point I'm going to make.
Okay.
The really serious point here is lots of people lost their lives. We need to get to grips with what could have been done better. We need to see the structural issues. So things have changed structurally in government. We have a National Situation Centre. COBRA's working extraordinarily well. We've done a lot more work on resilience. There's a Director of Resilience. There is a permanent crisis team. So we have learned some lessons. I want to know what more lessons we can learn structurally to do it better next time, if we have, or when we have, another time.
All right. Man in the dark blue jacket here. Yes.
The common denominator of this whole situation seems to be Boris Johnson, in my view. You knew back in 2016, when Michael Gove stabbed him in the back, that the guy was not competent for office. The people he brought in to Downing Street during COVID, the likes of Cummings and Kane, they did not create an atmosphere that was a working environment. All these roads lead back to Boris Johnson. And OK, he's gone now, thank goodness, but you guys sit there as Tory MPs and you defend this guy, and you've got people like Rees-Mogg and Dorries who all back this guy still to this day. And I don't think anybody here should be surprised at the chaos that man created during one of the...
Yes, the man behind you, yes, in the check shirt.
Camilla, you said that Dominic Cummings was quite nice about certain people. Do you think he was justified in the ones that he wasn't so nice about?
Oh, that's a tough question. I mean, probably. Yeah, probably. Okay. I mean, let's face it, in a crisis, really good people come to the fore, and people who aren't so good get exposed. I mean, I suspect, but I do agree with the previous speaker. I mean, the way he operated was bound to be counterproductive. And the one thing he hasn't admitted to is that his rage and his nastiness and his bullying of people was absolutely the wrong way to get anything done. And I really wish he would at least show some humility about that.
Man here in the front in the dark sweater.
I was going to say, will any of these people ever be held responsible for these things after we spent all this money on this inquiry?
Right. Well, I guess we will find out, won't we? Yes, and the man in the blue shirt there, yeah.
I think we could probably stop the inquiry now, because it's obviously Boris's fault, and that would be rather stupid. I remember John Stevens was on one of Andrew Marr's show on Sunday, and he said we were prepared for the flu epidemic, we weren't prepared for COVID.
Do you mean Simon Stevens?
Simon Stevens?
Yes, the former head of the NHS.
Just checking, make sure you're with me. Jolly good.
I'm still listening, mate. Carry on.
But he made that point. Secondly, there was quite clearly no crisis communications plan. Anybody who works in a corporate life has a crisis communications plan, regardless which industry, and something goes wrong, oil well, plane crashes, what have you. What I'm concerned about is I think it's already turned into a circus. As Caroline said, everybody's blaming everybody.
You're having a bit of an issue with names tonight, so if you don't mind me saying.
It's my age, don't worry about it. What I'd like to know is, this won't report now till 2026. Probability of another pandemic cropping up next year, 2025. Sweden managed to get through an interim review quite quickly. What I'd like to know is things like, did lockdown work? What parts of it did work? What parts of it didn't work? What will we change next time? Would we run in furlough? Did it work? Didn't it? Eat out to help out. Got that one right. And I think people probably need to understand, or maybe don't understand. Lord Frost had an article in the Telegraph a couple of days ago, and he said it was the closest thing to a war. We weren't prepared. People were running around. People got to get rid of this blame, because while this blame is going to go on for the next 3.5 years, we'll get nothing out of it.
Okay.
Chilcot took 6 years. The Northern Ireland in Lord Savile's inquiry took 12 years. We've got to get to the point where people can understand if it happens again, we're ready. And the way it's going on, that ain't going to happen.
So, Mustafa, I mean, the question is, James's question is, how can we have confidence in the sound running of our country? And I just wonder what you make of someone here on the panel who's run one hugely successful company. You're running another company now. What do you make of what you've heard? And does it give you confidence in the sound running of our country now?
I think it's very depressing. And I think that what it shows is if people elect somebody principally because they're funny and witty and they have floppy blonde hair, then we're going to pay the consequences. And
so do you agree with this man here, then? It's all about Boris?
I think without doubt, a lot of the blame has got to rest with him. And I think that there are lessons that we can learn. And next year, maybe even in the next few months, who knows, there's going to be an election and we have to make a decision about whether we pick people because of their competence and because they actually care about public service and they bother to read the briefings and they respect experts and they look for scientific consensus, or whether they're really about backstabbing and ego. And I think that most people in hindsight could see that that was Boris's main motivation.
Can I say it's even worse than that? The Conservative Party
briefly, because I've got to let other people
Boris Johnson to beat Jeremy Corbyn, knowing exactly what he was like. They knew exactly what he was like.
Nick.
Well, look, I think we already knew about this Downing Street. I mean, they had, what, over 100 fixed penalty notices for not following the rules when everybody else tried their best to follow the rules. But nonetheless, the level of this is absolutely shocking. And yes, Boris Johnson was the Prime Minister at the time, but the current Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, was the second most powerful person in the government at the time because he was the Chancellor of the Exchequer. And what we saw here, really, is this completely dysfunctional operation in charge of our country. They were not prepared for the pandemic. When we were all seeing those scenes on our TV screens from northern Italy of hospitals under pressure, because remember that, they had warning from what was happening on the continent of Europe already. What was the Prime Minister at the time doing? He was going on holiday for a week and not taking it seriously. And indeed, when we do get to a stage where we do get that lockdown that's been referred to in March, the Prime Minister at the time was making comments almost recklessly, carelessly about the lives of older people. This is, in my view, a quite shameful episode in our history. Frankly, an insult to the sacrifices that people made during the pandemic and an insult, frankly, to all those who lost loved ones. They should be held to account for it.
Marie. How can we have confidence in the sound running of our country? So James's question is taking you a bit further than just, you know, what do you think about what you heard? But does it give you confidence for government now and in the future?
I think it was a shambles. As a communal representative, it was traumatic, seeing so many people dying, seeing no investment in the NHS. The NHS workers, our heroes, were on the front line with absolutely no protection. I'll never forget the haunting image of Her Majesty the Queen sitting alone at the funeral of her husband when people we now know were having Partygate in Downing Street. Totally reckless. And the fact that so many people made notes and diary entries at the time in the evidence that's coming out now. Someone said that Boris Johnson has had no skill set. They knew it was a shambles. The only thing that saved the government was the vaccine. That was the only success of that. But I never think that our community will recover. What about our children, their misschooling? It was absolutely shocking. And I hope that we never get in this position again. And the responsibility must lie with the government.
OK. We're going to, very quickly, because I want to take another question, so I'll give you 30 seconds.
No, it was once in 100 years. Let's hope it's another 100 years before we have anything like this to deal with. That may come sooner. Marie just said it. There were things that were got right. So the vaccine rollout got right.
Yes, you made that point already.
Rishi's economic package meant that we've had the fastest recovery from COVID of France or Germany or Italy. We had a fastest economic recovery. And Boris, he had faults. They're going to come out. I'm sure they are from this process. But it's also him who led our response to Ukraine, where we did lead the world. And I just remind people in the audience, as someone said it, that the choice was Boris Johnson or Jeremy Corbyn in 2019, and I'd still rather have had a Conservative government running COVID and running Ukraine than Jeremy Corbyn.
OK. Marie, you mentioned the NHS, and we have a question about the NHS from Edward Rawstorm. Where are you, Edward? Oh, great.
This week, I was told my patient would wait 10 months for an urgent cardiology appointment. Can the NHS be resuscitated?
So, Edward, I'm assuming you're a GP?
I am, yep, local GP.
And is this a one-off?
No, It's all of our waiting lists are just getting longer and longer and longer.
And do you think the NHS can be resuscitated?
I think with proper investment and direction, it can be, but I think it's lacking that at the moment.
And how would you describe the state of it at the moment?
It's difficult being a GP because everyone who's waiting on waiting lists keeps coming back to see us with the same problems, wanting treatment that we can't provide. We're doing more and more in primary care to try and keep these people going, but it's hard and it's busy and it's not fair on the patients who are suffering.
It sounds pretty demoralising for you, actually, the way you described it. Nick?
Well, I think, firstly, we need an immediate injection of cash into the NHS, and then we also need to look at reform. It needs to be both of those things. Now, I believe that we should actually be abolishing the non-dom tax status. We should have a very simple principle that people who live here should pay tax on all of their income here, and we should be investing that money. We could have, for example, 700,000 more dental appointments. I mean, NHS dentistry in the state, that seems quite appalling. 2 million more procedures. This would really start to make a dent in the waiting lists that we are seeing at the moment. What is it? Nearly up to around about 8 million people in England waiting at the moment. We also, though, then do need to look at the NHS going forward. You know, I think we really need to be looking not just at the focus on treatment that people get in hospitals, but also in terms of prevention, a real neighbourhood health service. I mean, we've had a discussion earlier in this programme about artificial intelligence. One of the areas where AI really could help is in detection of medical conditions and problems at a much earlier stage. So I think we need both those things. We need that additional cash, and we've said where it's coming from, but also that reform to put the NHS on a firm footing for the future too.
So, Camilla, as you referred to before, you've advised the Department of Health, and also you've written about the issues around an ageing population. Can the NHS be resuscitated?
Well, I hope so, because I think it's still the right model, and I think it is possible. And I'd be interested to know what you really meant by lack of direction, because that seems to me quite critical. What can I say? I don't disagree with abolishing non-dom taxes, but you won't raise a penny. That's why Gordon Brown didn't do it. That's why Cameron didn't do it. So don't rely on that. It's a good thing to do, but I don't think you'll raise the money. I think you have to fund it somewhere else.
Not every independent expert does agree with that,
but
Camilla.
I'm just telling you that's what every previous chancellor said, so don't rely on it too much.
Sorry,
I didn't mean to. I didn't want to have that. Oh, sorry.
Just one thing. I think there is probably several million reasons why Rishi Sunak doesn't want to abolish it. But, I mean, the lack of political will in the past, I think.
It seems to me, and one of the things that I think I learnt in the pandemic was that if you lift a lot of the restrictions and the paperwork in the NHS and you break through some of the silos, people work really well and productively. And a lot of doctors said to me that they never wanted to go back to the old ways of doing things. A lot of nurses were absolutely overjoyed that quite a lot of what they regarded as really pointless regulatory barriers and paperwork were lifted. That was really, really important, I think. Unfortunately, we seem to have gone backwards. I think a lot of staff in the NHS, it's not just about money. They feel they're not respected. They feel they're not able to do the job that they came to do. We seem to have, in the NHS, one of the worst employers in the world, frankly. The way people are treated is terrible. There's nowhere to eat. There's nowhere to get changed. There's nowhere to debrief anymore. That something has gone fundamentally wrong, it seems to me, in the way that a lot of parts of the NHS are run. GPs face double regulation, which I think is a mistake. But equally, I agree with Nick on the tech side, not just the fancy AI, but actually there's a hospital in London, Kensington and Chelsea, which has reduced its waiting list by 30% just by using a new software platform that joins up a whole lot of things, enables you to see when the operating theatres... I mean, pretty basic stuff. And if GPs like you would agree to release your data, to share the data so that we, the patients, could actually see our medical records and that data could go to hospitals, which I know is a problem at the moment, things like that would actually mean that frontline staff have to spend so much less time endlessly entering information.
Now, we've only got about 4 minutes left, so you're going to have to be pretty brief, Mustafa.
Over the last 5 years, many people in the field of AI have published algorithms which achieve better than human-level performance on the diagnosis of chest X-rays, of mammograms, of OCTs for eye scans, of sepsis, for acute kidney injury prediction, all of the biggest killers in the NHS today. The challenge is that we have to have the courage to implement these things, and that means that we have to take risks with some of the data, and people need to be open-minded about that. There's far too much caution and fear about the data side of things, and there's actually a huge potential to save time and actually give nurses and doctors more time for themselves and for spending time directly with patients instead of having to do paperwork.
Jeremy, can the NHS be resuscitated? NHS waiting lists are heading towards 8 million at the moment, which is, I mean, the records keep being broken for the size of the waiting list.
Well, firstly, can I thank Edward for what he does for the community. We all rely on the NHS, we rely on the doctors, and...
yeah, but he's not very happy. So just saying thank you very much isn't really going to cut it, I don't think. I don't put words in your mouth, he's agreeing.
Camilla just said that we don't value the NHS enough. We do. You do a tremendous job, and I'm sure you do in the community. There has been, as I'm sure Edward knows, a vast increase in the number of appointments being provided by GPs. People assume that there aren't the appointments there. They are. There has been a huge increase in demand over the last 2-3 years, post-COVID. There's been a huge increase in demand. There's a number of reasons behind it. I hope... in your practice, Edward, you're getting some of the other medical practitioners alongside you, pharmacologists and the like, who will be able to provide supporting services to the GP. That's one of the new things we've introduced. It seems to be working very well. GPs in my part of the world say it certainly is. Nick, there is a huge amount of cash that is going into the NHS, but the panellists are right that that's not the only answer. Steve Barclay is absolutely focused on how we can use software to get the NHS working better, and that would be a relief to everybody, including those working in the hospitals and GPs. So, and Camilla's absolutely right. There are pilots in parts of the country, the North West, I think, in particular, but how you can just have use operating theatres more effectively, it does work.
NHS workers are my heroes. It's more than money that's needed. I haven't heard a convincing plan as to where this money is going to come from. AI clearly is the future for diagnosis, but is there going to be an NHS task force that's going to sit down and absolutely find out how we can deliver the services that we need? My life has been saved by the NHS. I know how important it is. I will always value it. We need to do more.
So, Edward, let me come back to you. So what do you think of what you've heard?
I'm really keen on technology, and I think using AI in any way we can in healthcare is great. My computer crashed 4 times today using little more than a browser. Oh. So we've just retired our fax machine. So I think we're a long way away from these great ideas. And I think the kind of...
got his head in his hands.
the basics need to be there before we get these ideas of, you know, Steve Barclay was photographed with a penguin that walks around the hospital the other day that was AI. You know, that's great, but it's a gimmick, isn't it? And I think we need to get the basics there so we can then develop these great things to really help our patients.
And are you any more confident you'll get them, having heard from, well, you've heard from the current government and someone who would like to be in the next government?
I wish I could say that I had.
Right, OK. Hardly a ringing endorse. I've got time for one more point. Oh, yes. The woman back there. Yes, I haven't heard from you before. Yes, in the blue dress.
Thank you. So I work for the NHS, and part of my role is to look at the operational side of, strike planning. So I wanted to ask about what you're going to do immediately in terms of preventing more consultant and junior doctor strikes. It's very difficult to sort out the allocation using a lot of locums, using the public
you don't know what you're doing. Right, you've got 20 seconds to answer that question. How are you going to sort out the strikes?
Look, I
talk to them might be a start.
We're always hearing from them, and it's right that we do. But as you recall, I think the opening salvo from the junior doctors was a completely unaffordable 35% increase. That can't be afforded. So we want to be able to spend money on technology. We want to make certain the system works best. I'm afraid we can't afford at the same time to be paying massive increases. We paid what was recommended by the independent bodies.
Right. That's probably not the answer you were wanting, by the looks of you shaking your head there, but I'm afraid that's the answer you're going to get because our time is up. So I'm sorry we can't take that further. Thank you very much to the panel. Thank you for all of you for coming along tonight. And thank you, of course, to you at home for watching. Remember, if you don't want to stay up late after 10 o'clock news on BBC One, you can always watch us live on iPlayer at 8, and we're also on BBC Sounds. And thank you very much to Rosemary Couchman for supplying the photographs of this beautiful town that we're in Chipping Campden. Until next week, Ian Clandidno from Question Time. Bye-bye.